Okay, you should be set.
Okay. Awesome. Oh, I've got myself completely confused. All right. So we're going to call the meeting to order a little after 2 o'clock. And the first item on the agenda is the written determination to convene electronic meetings. I got that from Summer. Do I need to read that thing again or like last time or?
Yeah.
I don't have it. Shoot. I guess I need to find it.
I would send it, but I'm in the middle of Kansas, so.
Oh, fair enough. You emailed it to me, right, Summer?
I sent it to you through DocuSign, so I might have bring email.
Okay, I can see I can view the completed document, I think. Oh. I have to sign in and I don't know my DocuSign sign in. Hang on. Sorry, here we go. I should be able to view this right here. Nope, won't let me see it. Ugh.
Cara, I have, if it's the text that's right at the top of our agenda, I have it in front of me. I can read it for you if you like.
Well, it's not the text at the top of the agenda, I don't believe.
No, it's that longer documentation that
because I have that. It's a much longer thing. And I didn't realize I should have printed it out. Now, of course, I've lost the agenda too in looking for that. Lovely. I'm so prepared. I apologize, everybody. Oh, shoot.
I think I found it. Let me see if I can share my screen.
Okay, sorry. Okay, there it is.
Can you see that?
I do think I can. So, pursuant to House Bill 5002 and Utah Code Annotated, subsection 52-4-207 4A and B, whereas pursuant to Moab Municipal Code subsection 2.08.015A, I am the presiding officer, chair at all meetings of the Water Conservation and Drought Management Advisory Board. Whereas Utah Code Annotated subsection 54.4.101 and the Open Meetings Act governs the conduct of meetings of the Water Conservation and Drought Management Advisory Board. Whereas the Utah Open Meetings Act amendments provide that a public body may convene and conduct an electronic meeting without an anchor location if the chair of the public body A makes a written determination that conducting the meeting with an anchor location presents a substantial risk to the health and safety of those who may be present at the anchor location. B, states in the written determination described in subsection 4A the facts upon which the determination is based. Whereas in the previous written determination I made on August 25th, 2020, I stated that the facts regarding COVID-19 and transmission, as well as Governor Herbert's statement regarding a continuing need for heightened caution, and I incorporate that prior written determination here, whereas the facts contained in the prior written determination remain true, including the facts that the state of Utah remains under a state of public health emergency. The City of Moab board meetings do require attendance by individuals at higher risk of severe illness from COVID-19, and the CD indicates that the lowest risk for events and gatherings is virtual only, whereas the health and safety of board members, city officials, employees, staff, and members of the public is best served by holding electronic meetings of the board. Whereas the board has prepared for and demonstrated the ability to effectively conduct its public meetings electronically, including providing members of the public means to observe the board's meetings and provide comments electronically. Now, therefore, I conclude that conducting the Water Conservation Drought Management Advisory Board meetings with an anchor location that is physically accessible for members of the public to attend in person presents a substantial risk to the health and safety of those who may be present at the anchor location. This determination will expire 30 days after the day upon which I made the determination. It is possible that the circumstances could warrant future determinations, and so I may reissue future written determinations at that time. And I signed that a couple days ago. And next time I'll make sure I save a copy of it. Sorry about that. So now we can call to order and talk about approving the minutes. What do we got?
I move we approve the minutes of September 9th as written, unless there are corrections elsewhere that I'm not aware of.
I second.
Okay, we have a motion and second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. So do you have board and staff reports up next? And I wanted to ask a question based on an email exchange that went on a couple days ago with Mike Duncan about something he wanted to talk about at this meeting if we have time. Can that be brought up after we get through the rest of the agenda if necessary, or do we have to rearrange the agenda to do that? I want to make sure I've got.
You can at any time. It's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
So any board or staff reports? Everybody's quiet. Go for it, Arnie.
Well, it's a Zoom meeting. People don't talk like they usually do in Zoom meetings. There were a couple of interesting discussions on water rights. The Division of Water Rights gave one, and then there was one at the MOP meeting that happened between our last meetings. I don't think I need to go over them. Everybody here was at them. There is something afoot at UDWRI to move on the appropriations, current appropriations and monitoring in our area. I was just going to leave it at that. I'm assuming most of you folks were either at those meetings. I know Chuck was there. I don't know about Carly. Carly, we missed you at the MOP meeting. Jeremy and Kyle, I don't think were at the other water rights meetings, but I guess if you need more discussion or anybody has any questions on that, let me know.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah. I guess, yeah, if I may, Cara, I'll add that when it came time for comments at the end of that meeting that Arnie's referring to, I kind of pestered, if you will, Mark Stilson to facilitate and get this show on the road. And the notion of trying to define safe yield, in particular for the so-called deep Glen Canyon aquifer. That's one that the city's wells and springs come out of, and that's the one that Dr. Gardner's latest Journal of Hydrology report talks about. And he points out right up front that we're withdrawing now about what he figures the recharge rate is. Mark has lots of questions about it. I think we all do. And it's potentially significant, all right, because once DWR pins a number on that number, then it would mean, in theory, that according to the state's safe yield law, that we could forget about appropriations. We couldn't do any additional net withdrawals out of that aquifer. So in my mind, that's the most immediate and pressing subject. So I kind of, as I say, I pestered Mark to basically say, hey, Mark, when we're going to get the show on the road. And I think he would prefer to let the groundwater management plan process run its course, which would be okay, except it won't even start until the end of next year. And then who knows how long after that. And meanwhile, we've got a town that's growing and additional water commitments. And that's what precipitated my thought about trying to get something on the books, infrastructure, if you will, to deal with a water restricted future. So Mark didn't comment any further about that, but that's kind of where I'd like to see us head.
Okay. Any comments for Mike or other board or staff report?
We're going to talk about the phase 4, was it, or phase 3 where they did the monitoring?
3 and 4.
3 and 4, but one of them had a big long list of monitoring sites associated with it. And I'll share thoughts on the current status of monitoring in this valley during that time.
Okay. Okay. Hi, Levi. Any, anything you want to, we're at the board and staff reports section. Is there anything you want to toss in there?
No, not at the moment. Thanks.
Fair enough. Sorry.
No,
All
you're
right.
good. I'm late. I apologize for being late.
I would.
Yeah.
Levi, it looks like you took care of that leak on First North there pretty darn quick. Well, I am continually impressed with your crew's ability to work quickly and their dedication to what they do. They do a good job.
Thanks, Arnie. Yeah, I can't take any credit for that. I have 4 amazing departments, and they're all stretched pretty thin, and they do amazing work. I'm proud of them.
They
Thank
showed
you.
up before first light on that one because it was right in front of my house. It was, they were quick.
Yeah, it's that was a big one. That one needed attention immediately.
Yeah, that was pretty big.
Yeah.
Chuck.
I guess I'd report that I think the board knows that we're moving forward for putting in a replacement well, new one to be called well number 12. And so, and I know Mike has had a discussion with Mark Stilson, but last week, Mark Stilson and we put together a Zoom meeting with representatives from UGS and USGS and DWR and the city and our consultants with the idea about doing some taking the opportunity while our well is being drilled to get some additional data that those agencies might be able to help. That we as a city might not collect geophysical data, perhaps some geochemistry. And so it looks like that's going to move forward. That well, we're looking tentatively at it going into construction or development in March or April. So there's still time to move forward, and just thought I'd mention that we're working with those agencies to see what we can do to collect some more information as that well goes in. So.
Chuck, I understand that UDWRI and basically the state is going to pick up the extra tab associated with this, and we don't need to look for further funding for that. Is that still the case?
Well, Mark's very hopeful that the state is going to pick up the funding, but his budget guy was there. I forget his name, Bill something or other, and he was like, well, we're going to have to talk. So we were actually going to do geophysical logging as part of the city's efforts, but it's kind of a minimal geophysical logging. And if they want to do some enhanced stuff, we're all hopeful the DWRI is going to pick up that additional tab for this stuff. That's why we had the call. That's the intent, as well as make sure that the data that we can collect and share it.
Okay. Jeremy, you have anything? I'm going to try to call you out, not to call you out, but just since I to remind myself that you're still there.
Yeah, make sure I'm still alive. No, I do not, but I appreciate hearing from everyone else. As I was not at the September meeting, I'm looking to catch up now and get back on track.
Okay. All right, seeing no more board and staff reports, we can move on to item 5, discussion of Gardner report, rethinking a groundwater flow system using a multi-tracer geochemical approach, a case study in Moab, Spanish Valley, Utah. And I was gonna leave this discussion up to all of you, primarily. I think Mike and Arnie have put a lot more time into reading this stuff than I have, so.
Well, Car, this item wasn't on the agenda, and I'd be happy to talk about it any way that you like. I thought the primary purpose of this meeting was, until we found out anyway, that Ken Combe can't be here in person, so to speak, today. Now, that subject ought to take first priority, and if we had time, we can get around to Gardner's stuff. Is that what you want to do, or what?
I guess then the question would be to you guys, what how long do you think item 6, which is talking about the Ken Combe stuff and the responses, and I believe Chuck is intending to help walk through some of that stuff since there have been some emails back and forth. So if you guys think that we should go to that first, we could do that. It doesn't matter to me what order we go in. I'm just going on what the order of the agenda I have in front of me is.
Yeah, the paper was Arnie requested that we include the paper on this agenda. It can go, it goes well with Mike's agenda or discussion, so it can be combined into that. It can be pushed to another agenda, of course, too, but whatever you guys want to do.
Can't hear you, Arnie. You got to unmute yourself.
Oh, there we go. Excuse
There
me.
we go. I can see your mouth moving, but I couldn't hear you.
Let's do the Ken Cole thing. We've wanted to do that now for 3 months.
Okay, so we'll swap these in order. We'll go item 6 first and then item 5. Is that what I'm hearing? Okay, so item 6 is a discussion of and recommendations to the city council regarding the hydrologic and hydrogeologic assessment of the surface water and groundwater resources affecting the Moab Springs and Wells phases 3 and 4. There were 7 attachments to read through on this, including the reports phase 3 and 4. Unfortunately, Ken is unable to be with us today due to some health issues. So I know that I think it was attachment 4 had some explicit short responses to some of the questions. And then I think the idea was for Chuck to be on here to go through some of this stuff as well. So I'll again defer to you all and just sleep in if I need to facilitate discussion. What do you guys want to do?
Well, Arnie, I guess I would ask you, it would be really nice to have Ken here. He wrote rather abbreviated responses to our questions. And in response to that, last week I went through, stuff I had written questions about and so forth, and kind of reviewed some work I had done and concluded that nothing really much had changed. I mean, I still have the same problems. The responses Ken wrote that I've seen so far didn't particularly, certainly not in any depth address my questions. And so, I don't know what's to be gained by my saying the same old thing over again. If you got something you'd like to proceed in Ken's absence, Arnie, now might be a good time to do it.
And the other thing, just to leap in for a split second, we can also, I think a piece of this, Carly, correct me if I'm wrong, is that this needs to go to council for the council to start to look at all of this. So in light of the fact that Ken is not able to be here today, we also could be putting together some kind of a statement or something that goes along with what we, Ken stuff to the council, just saying, hey, here are our questions and concerns about it. And then that way it can move forward to council. So that could be another way we deal with this since we haven't been, since Ken can't be here today.
Yeah, I think that's a really good approach. What I guess I had in mind is the council has a workshop scheduled on kind of just water generally. Definitely these reports are going to be the subject of it on December 16th, I believe. And because they want to get their hands on these reports, start reviewing them. My intent was to, at the very least, all of the raw information that we have on it, as well as anything as a board you would like to produce, but certainly sending along Arnie, Mike, Car, all of the questions that you have raised, and the responses to them from Ken would be part of the information that the council was seeing. And if you want to add to that, of course, that's appropriate as well. But making sure it's part of the larger council discussion is what I had in mind.
Okay, so what you got, Arnie?
Well, guess I can't read the difference between mute and unmute today. It was quite a long time ago when I wrote these, and I remember looking back. I haven't seen a lot of these comments. I'm looking at some of them now. Mike is right. Some of them are rather short, and they're not necessarily they weren't the answers to the questions I was looking for, basically. And I don't want to berate Ken's work. Some of Ken's work can be used in the future. I'm very happy with phase 3, which is the protection zones. As far as I'm concerned, in terms of where the water's coming from for the springs and that kind of stuff, he's he's jumped through the hole or jumped through the hoop that needs to be jumped through, and there are adequate protection zones. One could argue they might be a little big. One could argue that they may not be actually where our source water is coming from. But either way, they satisfy the requirements that is necessary, and they will protect our springs. I don't think we need to go through phase 3 in terms of a beat it up type of way, because it will suffice. It will do the job. I think it'll do the job the city was, and I believe I said that at some point in time. I had some comments on it that weren't major. So if you want to just talk about phase 3 first, that's great. That's my comments on phase 3. Mike, do you want to say anything about phase 3?
Yeah, I agree with you, Arnie. I think that's the most valuable part of Ken's work. I think it's all great. The part of it that really interests me much is I haven't looked for a while now at phase 3, but I get the idea that much of that extended source protection zone lies outside the city limits, if I've got that right, and into the county. And if these protection zones were to be made official, adopted, and so forth by the state as well as by the city and the county, what are the ramifications of establishing those zones? In other words, are there property owners up there with developments that they were planning on doing something with? What does it actually mean? In other words, are we likely to get pushback from somebody saying, "Hey, what are you guys doing establishing a source protection zone way out here? We're miles away from your springs"? You know, I need to learn more about what all that means, because council will be interested in that. Okay.
Looks like Chuck might have a thing to say about that. Go for it, Chuck.
Yeah, Mike, in our city code, which I know does not apply outside city limits, there are specific constraints on activities in the spring and well protection zone. Now that we've got those new zones, and in fact, they are in effect because we've been waiting for these because the state wants us to update them every, I think it's 6 years. We updated them. Our intent is, when we get a few minutes time, is to notify the county just as a partner. And then ideally we would either do a mail out to residents, but there's nothing in there that's really onerous. It's things like Lionsback, as an example. Lionsback has a drinking water source protection plan that was put in place back in 2009. And it's things like not changing your oil in the driveway, as just one example. And just kind of common sense things of not getting pollutants into our source protection zones. And Lionsback has incorporated that into all of their facilities, and they're not complaining. Of course, they get development rights, but my point to you, I think to your point, which is I don't think there's anything by adopting those zones that prevents either single family development or larger scale developments. It's just a matter of implementing some best management practices to protect our spring and well protection zones. So hopefully that helps a little bit.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Well,
Can I add a little more to that, Chuck? The state of Utah Division of Water Quality is already, oh, come on, Arnie. Source protected, not source protected, but put the zones of drinking water out there, source protection zones for drinking water for the entire valley. And that was published in 2007, or was it even before that, 2002 and 2003. So most of what's involved with Ken's source protection plan are overlays on what is already called the classification of groundwater, 1B pristine. And so nothing's really changed in terms of planning, and those classifications are intended not to stop development, but to guide development. So for instance, Mike, we're not going to put an oil well up there and start fracking. Okay, we're just going to say no to that, because that would harm our class 1 pristine aquifer. But that doesn't mean you can't do anything on the property. And each project would be evaluated specifically based on its merits and what sort of protection plan it came up with.
Okay. So Arnie, would that make a difference? I mean, if BLM offers leases like they have like a couple of times now in the last few years, up in that area, then this would be another official reason, if you will, where the city could object to such. Is that
Correct. Yes.
And isn't this already somewhat similar to the area that was, didn't we already have a sole source aquifer zone of some kind that was like established back in the 90s, if I recall correctly?
Yes, we have that also. So we've already got a classification, groundwater classification scheme for the entire valley. We have a sole source protection. This drinking water, Chuck, I shouldn't be talking, Chuck should be talking. We need to put source protection zones. And I will note that in zone 1 and in zone 2, there are some pretty tight requirements in zone 1 and 2. But
Right.
the larger zones are zone 3 and 4. And generally a city will actually fence off an area in zone 1.
Right.
Okay, and keep everybody and everything out of in zone 1, but it's a very, very small area, and the city would probably want to obtain the property rights to that area.
Yeah, and in fact, for the most part, Arnie, the type 1, we do have that. It's so close to our springs, but we do have those places fenced in. You're exactly right. And Mike, yes, this is actually something that we would utilize as input onto any NEPA process, or whether it's on the forest, because some of these zones go out into the forest and the BLM. I believe they go into the forest well zone. So having these adopted, and they are adopted by now, they have been accepted by drinking water. These the ones that you saw in phase 3.
Yeah.
We submitted them.
So these don't supersede the sole source aquifer, they're in addition to.
Correct.
Is that correct? Okay. So it seems
Chuck,
like
thank you. Yeah,
no,
Arnie,
this should be a
Charlie,
whole-
thank you all. That helps.
Okay. So I guess the big question then is phase 4 of the report. Is that, do you guys want to move on to that topic? Oh, and Jeremy, I'm sorry, did you have anything on phase 3?
No, nothing else to add.
Okay. So phase 4. Looking at all you. Go for it.
Well, I really didn't comment on phase 2 because I thought that phase 1 didn't answer my original questions, and there were some problems with the water budget. I will say at this point in time, I know we're talking about phase 4, but I think I said it before, phase 2 does a good job of a water budget for the lower Mill Creek system, and it can be useful. Phase 2 does a good job in its current idea state, hypothesis. That obviously is a preliminary one, as he said, and it needs a lot of refinement if we're going to use that model, but it doesn't really model our drinking water source, because as I've stated numerous times, our drinking water source is not coming from Upper Mill Creek, it's coming from high in the LaSalle's. I had some comments on section 4. The one that I guess I've taken most egregiously is the one where I said you've stated that the amount of water that the Chile diversion is taking out has led to a 17% decrease in the city springs. And I've said the body of science doesn't agree with that. And all Ken Combe said was, well, my body of science does. I was actually hoping he'd show me some numbers to prove that statement. And he's driven that statement in 3 or 4 times at this point in time. And I don't think you can justify that based on the science.
So I guess my question then is, since we can't have a conversation with Ken right now, it's an impossibility. Would it be something we could do before the 16th of December to put together a short letter or statement or whatever you want to call it, memo from the Water Conservation Advisory Board to the council saying, here are the things that we feel weren't quite fully addressed and we don't completely agree with. So as you read through this, just keep these questions in mind. Is that something that anyone has a comfort level with doing? Because I mean, at this point, and Chuck, feel free to respond to what Arnie was just saying as well. But I mean, since we don't have, like, I have a question because I was reading through the rationale for the vegetation the phreatophytic vegetation. And here's a range of, on the two different studies he cites, there's one that's a range of 42 to 90 something, and another that's 60 to 90 something, but he picked 90 and didn't give any rationale as to why choosing 90 as the number, the multiplier to come up with water use. I mean, there are some things in there that I think they're worth questioning. How much of that do we want to put into writing before this gets sent to council so that they can just know, hey, we have some concerns?
Cara, those are great questions. I'm going to get back to my opinion on that question in just a moment. If I may, let me take 60 seconds to try to summarize my main questions. Both in phase 2 and in phase 4, Ken assembled a water budget which had a collection of terms that are all added together to describe either ground or surface water going into a study area and all the water that comes out of it. And again, and in his budget, he says, well, this is phreatophytes, this is groundwater at the top, this is surface water out the bottom, and so forth. But he didn't, numerically, he didn't distinguish between the two. And I claim that using the fact that surface water can't accumulate long-term on the surface is a very handy sanity check, if you will. And he didn't do that, and I did do that. I did it in both phase 2, I did the same thing on phase 4, and particularly in the pre-development scenario, it just doesn't add up, okay? In phase 4, for example, in the lower Pack Creek aquifer, we had his model suggests that we have 3,000 acre feet more surface water. I forgot now which way the signs work. More surface, I had to go back and look at my spreadsheet. 3,000 acre feet, we'll say too much going in, and 3,000 acre feet too little groundwater going out. So if you add them all up, it all cancels out. He ends up with zero net in the pre-development situation, and it looks good. But if you try to use the sanity check, it doesn't pencil out at all. There's a couple of other problems. One is he put a lot of weight into how much precipitation falls in those aquifers. And the answer is nothing really, basically. I mean, it's small compared to what falls in the high mountains. That's really where all the water comes from. And Ken's model too, basically, we did this all the time in the engineering business and aerospace. His model is, the error bands on it are atrociously bad, because he's basically adding a bunch of numbers, all with big air, not all of them, but some of them with big air bands on them, all taking the water that goes out, some of those with big air bands. By that, I mean, he's taking a wild ass guess, or a swag as we might call it at best, a scientific wild ass guess about what parameters are. Well, I'm assuming he's got crack in the matrix sandstone that's 50 meters wide by 200 meters deep. Well, great, he doesn't justify it. It's just something that he says, and small changes up there will make a huge difference in the water budget. And so the bottom line on where I'm coming from is I don't believe it. I mean, it's not so much I don't believe it, I just don't trust it because all the things that I'm talking about here. So if we were to say something to council about all this, I would say the report isn't in terms of a groundwater budget determination that I can hang my hat on. I just can't. And it's a very negative thing to say to council, all right? And I mean, we can always emphasize the source protection zones as a positive spin on it, but that's about all I personally can put a positive spin on.
Can I add to that? I agree with Mike completely. I must admit the modeling approach he's taken is a viable one. It's taken many other places, okay? Whether or not you can nail down all the particulars in his model is where the rubber meets the road. And if in particular, Mike, I only took one point of contention to talk about, and that was Brumley Creek. I think he said that, I don't remember exactly what he said. He said there was 400 or 500 acre feet entering the Pack Creek system or something like that coming from Brumley Creek. I'm actually familiar with Brumley Creek. If you don't mind if I share my screen, can I share my screen for a moment?
I believe so.
Okay. oh, excuse me.
I don't know if you can, but you may.
I may. Let me see if I can make this happen.
It always messes with me when I try to do it. So
Yeah. So I took a
There you go.
photo of Brumley Creek. This is the LaSalle Loop Road going up towards Geyser Pass. Right at the bottom, this is above, and there is some riparian vegetation there. If you don't mind, I'm going to stop sharing that, and I do have a picture. And there's Brumley Creek. There is a cottonwood there, you guys, but I'm not seeing 400 or 500 acre feet out of that. And I realized that there's really never been much talk about water in Brumley Creek, basically because there's no water
in Brumley
Creek. Yeah, and to that point, to that point is that the data that Ken is using, as Mike has stated, is questionable at best. He said it was preliminary, and it is preliminary. I will agree that the model itself might be useful if you were able to nail down all the factors in it. But with the numbers that he's used, I have no faith in it either, you guys.
So
that's hard for me to say because Ken's done a lot of work there, and there are a lot of good things. There's some things, there's some understanding to be gained out of that document. But in terms of numbers for a water budget, I'm sorry.
Well, and I guess to me that is something. I mean, I think that there's a way to draft something that helps explain, here are the useful parts of this. And if you're looking for, as Emily has said in several meetings, I want a number. Well, it's a complicated system, and trying to nail down a number is not going to happen, is the big take home I've gotten from this. I mean, I feel like I've had less time to put into reading it in depth as you guys, as Arnie and Mike have had. But to me, and I go back to the vegetation one just because I know quite a bit about vegetation, when I question that number there and I go, oh, that's awfully handy that number kind of moves through this document in this way, that to me, it's too neat. So I do think that there may be a way to draft something that just basically says, you know, it's great to use this document for these things, but don't be looking to this document for a hard and fast number that you can say, this is what we have, because I think that's what some people are looking for. And I think that that's more than can be expected of the system, because it's not a simple system. And I wish that Chuck was still on here, but anyway.
Yeah, so let me, Carl, those are good points, Carl. Let me, a couple more things, concerns of mine. Ken had a very nice chart in both phase 2 and phase 4 that showed kind of a block diagram of, you know, where water comes in and where water goes out. And he had one there, all right, for surface water and another one for groundwater. And he showed connections between the two, where you've got a losing stream is water that's coming out of the surface and going into groundwater, and vice versa for a gaining stream. And those are great. But in his water budget models, numerically, he didn't account for any of those cross terms. So I attempted to do that based on Blanchard's data back in 1984, 85, which is really tricky to do, all right? Because if you guys remember, if you look at the well levels report, what we saw in general climate-wise was it was dry in the 1970s. It started raining like gangbusters in the 1980s. About that time, Ken's Lake went in, and that was also, 1984 was about near the peak of what well levels were looking at. So that's his only numbers that he's got to go on. One study that was taken apart, one set of data in 1984 and a few more in 85. And if you try to correct Ken's model and come like that, he's still way off base on balancing out surface water in a pre-development environment, okay? And the other problem with trying to use discharge to quantify recharge is that we're all making the assumption that the aquifer is in equilibrium, long-term equilibrium, because it's basically what goes in amount of water stored in there is the difference between what goes in and what comes out. And I don't know any way to verify that. For all I know, is since since the 1950s, and they had 3,000 people here, and the city started pumping wells, and Kins Lake went in, and all that kind of good stuff. We don't know if we're in equilibrium or not. That was the beautiful thing about Phil Gardner's report, that where he used difference in groundwater ages to do this so-called lump parameter model. And I might add one more thing too while I'm on the floor, and then I'll shut up. I asked Phil about a couple of assertions that Ken had made, in particular about Mill Creek dropping through the fracture zone up above the golf course and recharging the city's wells there. And I said, do you agree with that? He said, no. He said, and the reason he doesn't agree with it is that it doesn't match the geochemical signature that he sees. Mill Creek water has one distinct signature, and the deep Glen Canyon aquifer has another, and they don't cross there. There may be some mixing, but for the most part, he said, no, he doesn't agree with it. And there was at least one other major question that I can't remember now. But anyway, so Phil's comments don't, I mean, if the two models had consensus, then that would be great, but they don't in all areas. So that's another reason that I'm uncertain about how much confidence to put in Ken's work.
So a suggestion I have, and then I'll ask Jeremy if he's got anything to add, and then toss it back to Chuck, unless someone else wants to jump in. But it seems to be what I'm hearing so far from folks is that there are aspects of this that have been really useful. For instance, presenting and understanding the concepts of a very complicated system, bringing forth some things to be thinking about. The groundwater monitoring plan is good, and is probably something that's very important, especially in light of the fact that using this, or frankly any thing that's been put out there yet, as far as even the USGS study, to come up with a definitive water budget isn't really advisable at this time. And so really what you need to be doing is monitoring and trying to understand better. And honestly, it seems like we're going back to what you always hear scientists say, which is there is more science needed to fully understand the system. I don't know if I'm over summarizing what you guys are saying, because I do feel like there is no reason, we don't need to be submitting a 10-page document that tries to line out all of the places where we disagree, or where various members of our group disagree. I don't know that that's a useful thing to do, but it does seem like having something that just points in the direction of some food for thought for council, of just like, hey, hang on a minute, tread lightly on this concept of a water budget. Yeah.
I think you're making some really good points, Cara. I would encourage, whatever the document looks like, it should be, I like what you're saying, split it up into, this is how it's helpful, this is where we understand, these are the things that we still do not quite understand from this work. I think it'll help the council themselves, it'll give them sort of a guiding point to say, here is what we want to make sure we understand too. So it's not like this is being adopted as policy and therefore it has to be corrected. This isn't going into an ordinance. This is a study performed by the city's consultant. And it doesn't need to be ratified by this board or anybody else. But I think what can help is just if the council can understand what your questions still are, and they can be like, here are where we feel like the holes are still. It starts to map maybe that contour. So, I mean, that's what I would have in mind for the most helpful or pertinent feedback. Yeah.
I did notice Jeremy was trying to say something. Jeremy, did you have something you wanted to add?
No, I noticed it did that too. That was probably because I breathed too heavily. But no, nothing in interruption of what Carly was saying, but just that based on what everyone has been saying thus far, and in addition to what everyone's been saying, it seems like Mike and Arnie have the most immediate feedback, things that we all agree with, maybe not all of us, but most of us agree with to some degree. And like Carly is saying, maybe in that category where we include the things that we yet feel we do not have enough information about. My question then for this group is, what do we recommend at this point? And is there something we want to recommend now? Is there a particular course of science or monitoring that we want to see funded or followed up on? What does that look like at this point? And do we want to include that in this document?
Let me suggest something, Jeremy. Thank you, Kara. How about this? Just thinking about this. I think we owe it to Ken not to just cut this report off right here with the water board, even though what we could do, and I could draft for you if you like, and you guys can chew on it. Basically summarize the two things I'm getting out of Ken's report. One is the water protection zones, which we've already talked about. Those are positive. That's great. The second part of it is the water budget. We would report Ken's top level numbers together with whatever we can ascertain about what he ascribes to error bands on it. In other words, how much confidence does Ken think, either quantitatively in numbers or qualitatively in words? And there's some of both in there, all right? Because Ken admits right off the bat that he's got a sparse and incomplete data set in some cases and so forth. But anyway, kind of summarize those on one digestible slide for council. And then here's a hooker. If do we wish, I would wish to either put a stamp of approval on or say something about the confidence that the water board has in it. And I would say.
So hang on a second. I actually, sorry, Carly, but I feel like we do better by presenting what we find useful and what we feel like is missing or not quite enough. I don't know that we have any authority to approve or disapprove of this in that kind of a way. I may be wrong about that, but it strikes me that, you know, this is going to be a political situation. This is going to be what I see, which is unfortunate, but it's just the reality. It's reminding me, and I don't know if Levi may remember when there was a planning commission meeting years and years ago at what's now, I think, a Shell or something, Chevron, on First North, and it was to talk about dark skies. And they shut off the lights inside the building, and then they put a facsimile, Marcus, I forget his last name. Anyway, he had wired in some lights into the canopy there, and to show what dark skies would, this would be fully lit. And I was just new on planning commission at the time, and everyone in that group that was there who was against dark skies ordinances, all of them saw, oh my God, this is so dark, I would never stop here. And all of the people who were in favor of dark sky ordinances saw, here's what, you know, this is perfect, isn't this great? This is wonderful. I kind of feel like these reports are the same way. People are going to see in them what they want. And so I think it's important that we take a moment to go, what's realistic with this, and not bash anyone, not say, here's the holy grail of anything, but simply just say, hey, yeah, like everything in life, this is complicated and this doesn't have all the answers, but here's where it's useful. And it's useful in the water protection zones. It's useful in the groundwater monitoring plan. Those are the things we need to be, here's what we see we agree we need to be doing. And then these are the things where we probably don't have enough information to definitively say, here's our this is or that's. I'll turn it over to Carly and Chuck. Sorry, we've been.
I think you made some really good points. I think it's important to recognize the role of this board, which is an advisory one. And so we really appreciate the insight you're giving, the advice, which is, this is what we think is a good idea. This is what we have more questions on. We also recognize that this is a board of, you know, volunteers who have distinct specialties and expertise, where you provide valuable, like a critical eyes and critical thinking skills. But what we have done here is hire a hydrogeologist to do this work, and no one on this board is a hydrogeologist. So I think the city has hired this expert to produce this body of work. And to have an advisory board say simply, we don't agree with it, or we're not accepting this, seems a little outside of, I think, the task that I think the council would look for, which is just, when you look at this and you apply your respective disciplines and your critical reasoning skills, where are things still unclear? How can you help us understand this and what you know it to be? Additionally, I'm getting a little uncomfortable because we've had this conversation a little bit before. With the authority of this board, like Cara mentioned, is, you know, Conservation and Drought Advisory Board. And this is very much a water resource kind of question. And, you know, again, we've harnessed your expertise because it's available and you've been so eager and willing to provide it. But it is sort of, I'm worried about kind of the scope, the fuzziness of the scope of your authority in sort of approving or disproving studies. The study doesn't go into effect. It's not, you know, implementable. So there's no need to say to stop it or to try to hang it up. What's going to happen is we just produce this work that was done according to a scope, which I don't think anyone is looking at the work versus the scope to make sure how things line up necessarily. But I mean, we appreciate the insight, but this is going to be presented as part of larger discussions when it comes to water resource management to the council. And that's with Chuck, with Joel, with me, with our water lawyers. And we just appreciate your insight into what you understand the studies to mean and where you think there's more explanation needed from the studies.
How about we just say that, Carter, we present summary of Ken's results, and then we say the Water Advisory Board recommends further study, period, and make no comment, yay or nay, about the report. If we say nothing, it's a tacit blessing of the report. That's my fear, because I don't bless the son of a gun, okay?
Council is looking necessarily for the blessing to say, like, does the water board agree? I think they're saying, what does the water board think of it? And like, where are their questions? You know, I think there have been a lot of things said, like, this doesn't hold up, I don't understand. I'm not seeing any counterpoint or evidence that says otherwise either. I'm worried about those kinds of generalizations when there's no evidence to support either. So I think we should stick to what you know, which is like, I see this number, I don't understand it. This is a question, this is unclear to me.
I do understand it, Carly. I mean, that's the point. I mean, granted, I'm not a pro, but I understand a lot of it, all right?
Yeah, I don't understand how Ken came to this, right? Not understand the theory, but you're like, I'm not understanding this conclusion or why it happened this way, right?
Well, I think that also Arnie has brought up multiple times that it is in contradiction to other studies, other research. So I, you know, and this is where I guess I just hesitate to do a laundry list 10 pages long, like I said, that's going into all of this stuff. I'm trying to figure out what's actually useful to help the council read this critically.
Yeah.
That's the piece I feel like is our role, unless others on the board don't agree.
I think it's fine to say something like, we understand, like, if it's Gardner or whatever it is, you know, there seems to be discrepancy, or, you know, those haven't been reconciled, and you can note that certainly. I think that's fine, but
and I go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I do want us to. The further study is, to the best of my knowledge, is the work that the USGS did, including Mr. Gardner's work. And I do want to move into that discussion before too long. So when I say more study is needed, I can say, here's what I have more confidence in, and I'd like to present this to you.
I'd like to comment on that last bit, if you don't mind. So I've heard, and I'm going to get away from what we're actually talking about, a lot of times the city and other officials ask me that, what's our number? Where do we cut water off? And, you know, UDWRI has the key to that. No matter what study the city produces, no matter what happens, UDWRI will make the decision on what the number is. They have the key. They own the water. So if UDWRI would like to use Ken Combs' report in developing that water, that'd be great. I don't think they will. I know they won't. But one of the points to be made in whatever we comment on to the city council is that this is not a statement on the amount of water we have. UDWRI will make that decision when they feel they have enough information to make that decision. Okay, I want to make sure that's clear to the city, that this is not a number. that's going to be used for any policy making at this point in time because UDWI makes the policy.
Right. Well, I think there also might be a mismatch on why this report was commissioned. It's not just about that final number. The information generated about like where those, for phase 3 especially, very important information to know, sort of how it works, the dynamics of the system, the contours of the system. It's not just, the number isn't the only end goal from the city's perspective of how we manage our water resource, right? So I know that that's something that the city council is very interested in, and this water board and this community, what's the magic number? But that's not exactly totally all of it either, if that makes sense.
I'd also like to comment that I had pretty extensive comments on the monitoring section of that. I thought there was a whole lot of overkill in there and a whole lot of stuff that was already being done that the city doesn't necessarily need to participate in. So I guess Chuck, have you any thoughts on at this point in time his monitoring plan that he's suggesting that you'd like to, that you're planning on giving to the city?
Specifically, Arnie, that's the first monitoring plan that I've seen that deals with everything. I like the monitoring plan as a starting base. It was never intended to be the be all end all, here's the document that everyone needs to go out and implement. It was, here's a comprehensive look that I'd not seen before, and I'm not aware that's out there, that included atmospherics, runoff, water quality, water quantity, all those activities. And you and I have had a little offline where it is a starting point. And I saw in your email that, oh, we're already doing this here. We're already doing that there. That's great. Let's put it in, let's collect all the data, put it together and compile it someplace. But I think it's a very positive thing because there's never been one before. And if I may, Cara, can I,
Yes.
one thing I was going to say in all this, and if the board's going to do as the board wishes, which you should, Ken works for the city of Moab. We're his client. Part of the reason Ken did this work is because we're coming up on a groundwater management plan that the state is going to implement, I believe. I guess it's not for certain yet, but I think everything's pointing that way. I think it's appropriate for the city to have its own study, its own information to represent itself in that groundwater management plan. I don't think, and I believe, Ken's work started before I came to the city, but I don't know that it's all in the state's hand, that we have to trust USGS, that we have to trust UDWRI, that we have to trust UGS to represent the city. I think when it comes time for the groundwater management plan, we all work cooperatively, but we need to have the right to give our data that we agree with to the state as our position in this groundwater management plan, as opposed to letting the state tell us how to use the water that the city has. So I just wanted to remind everyone that Ken's there working for the city. He's not working for any other large agency. He doesn't have a greater agenda. He's working in the same way I don't. He's a technician and I'm a technician. We're here to advise the decision makers. But I just thought I'd let you make that point because it was kind of dancing around the edges there as I followed the conversation, that there's no greater agenda on Ken's work than to do the best he can for the city. And I hear what the board's saying, which is that some of the work they like and some of it they don't like, and that's okay. That's what the board and the council can decide on. But I certainly hope that no one's questioning Ken's intentions.
Oh gosh, no. Hey, Chuck, so why wouldn't we have this be money well spent, if you ask me, considering what we've already spent on Ken? During the groundwater management plan process, let's get Ken on that conversation. I mean, it'd be wonderful to have another professional technical input on all the issues that the groundwater management plan will have to consult. I don't want Ken to go away. I just said that I don't have a lot of confidence in the budget right now, but to have him participate in that process that will result in a DWR specified for safe yield and so forth would be a great thing.
Okay, I think that's a great idea, Mike. And I think that's where David's vision always was when David was here, David Everett and I. That was always the vision, to get in a position where the city would have a stronger set of knowledge base to work in this groundwater management plan. Because as you know, and I think the board knows, on paper we got all the paper water rights we could ever ask for.
Right.
Yeah, I just see Phil and Ken, chewing the fat out there, examining each other and they're sure to come to a better estimate than they would with either one of them alone. Okay.
I'd agree with you. And I did want to say real quick, Cara, that I've been trying to get with Ken over the last 2 weeks, and he would love to have been here today, but he's been in the hospital all day, and it's very difficult to get appointments for procedures now because of COVID, right? And he had to get the openings he could get. So he's not dodging talking to the board. I want to make that very clear, that he has to try and address questions. If you ever want him to come back, he will, or I just want you to know that it was something that he couldn't help by not being here today.
Can we talk about his health? How's he doing? I got a couple of health problems of my own. How's he doing?
Well, today's the testing day that will lead to the further tests. So, I mean, he's a little nervous about it, but
Of course.
I think he's hopeful.
Yeah, well, my next appointment with a cardiologist is out to mid-February. I mean, they are that busy.
Mhm.
That's why he was able to get his 4-hour nuclear stress test today, and he took it. Because
Well, best of luck to him, okay?
Yeah, I'll pass that on.
So, I think what I've been hearing everybody say is, so I feel like there's been there's definitely some healthy questioning of different aspects of the report, of what Ken's put together. I think that this is very much an emerging understanding of our watershed and of our aquifer. And I guess what I'm looking for here, because we do need if this is going to be before the city council by 3 weeks from now, I think it is 4 weeks from now, 3. I feel like it would be better for us to provide something from this group that says, hey, we've read this, here are our thoughts on it. I feel like it could be more constructive if it was, instead of nitpicking apart everything, simply saying, here's the pieces, this is useful in these ways, and caution, don't use this or at this point anything to come up with a hard and fast number, because that doesn't exist at this point in time. And also there's other things to be looking at and examining for the city as they move forward in dealing with managing their water, and making sure that the city is prepared for appropriate water conservation and drought situations. It seems to me, does that meet anybody? I'm seeing some, I can't see Jeremy, so I don't know what you think. But as far as others on this call, is that feeling too mamby-pamby to you? Is that feeling like a useful thing to do? It feels like the other option is it goes on to city council and then they look at it and come to their own conclusions. But then it also makes me question, why are we meeting as a board if we can't at least agree on something to suggest as far as, hey, these aspects are good. And perhaps, Arnie, with things like the groundwater monitoring plan, the water protection zones are great. The groundwater monitoring plan, needs to be reconciled with the things that are already occurring in the watershed, and because there are some efforts that are already being made, and like everything that I do, it feels like what really makes things work is when we work as a collaboration, and you have that this entity and that entity and this other entity are all doing different things that help bring it together, so we have a more clear picture. Is that something that seems at all functional to be doing? And I know you tried to talk there for a minute, Jeremy, sorry.
No, once again, I'm just breathing heavily. But I'm in agreement. I'm particularly in agreement with what Carly has to say about what our role is, what Cara has to say about how to structure this document and what to provide. And then I think a lot of the boiled down points can come from Arnie and Mike at this point. My suggestion before of recommendations maybe isn't necessary right now, and maybe doesn't need to come from us, but we could add something that says, we'd be happy to further discuss any of these points through direct contact or something like that. But yeah, putting something down does make sense to me, and I think it should be, as we've said so far, what we feel are the top 5 takeaways, and what we feel are not points of contention, but the topics that require further study. Just something as simple as that.
Mm-hmm.
Carly, so question for you. I got on my calendar here, December 16th. That's a Wednesday. Is this the workshop that we're talking about here?
That is my understanding. Chuck, I thought it was the 16th.
Okay, yeah, fine. So who's going to, if we're going to have a workshop about water, who's going to construct materials? What all do you want to present? Just this stuff with Ken's work, or do you want, would this be a good time for me to append my little slideshow about, you guys have seen about Gardner's work? Because you guys, that presentation looks ahead a little further. I mean, it's got some suggested legislative action in it, and then it goes on to back up. So how's this going to work?
I think what I had in mind, I know the mayor, I don't know if you've spoken with the mayor, but the mayor is aware of like that Gardner discussion. You can put your own emails. I think we're hammering out that agenda more. I know Chuck has been giving some presentations, overviews, and I think we wanted to have like your the basis of work discussion that you wanted to have with staff and with council. So I can imagine it part of it, but the mayor is ultimately the one that puts the agenda together. So I don't want to overpromise, but I thought it would be part of that 6.
Okay, well, I think it might be a great time. I will say this, Carly, if I don't do this presentation I put together, then I will want to do it as soon as I can. Let's put it that way. Maybe next year, but it's definitely something I would love to present to council at a workshop.
I really like what Mike's saying about putting some legislation out there prior to having to enforce any legislation, giving some backbone or background to the area so that they're prepared when the time does come to move forward. And I actually liked his ideas. I thought they were great. Mike's going to talk about those later, but as far as the letter goes, or opinion we want to give them, how do you want to structure this, and who's going to do it, Cara?
Oh, sorry, muted.
Unmute, Cara.
Sorry. Since there's someone else in my office at the moment, I decided to mute between. I forgot. I can assist with something. There's 2 things. My time is somewhat tied up with other things in the next 3.5 weeks, but also I don't feel qualified to write certain aspects of this. So I don't know the best way to move forward with this. It sounds like, Jeremy, you're not in a position to be able to do that kind of thing at this point in time. So yeah, I can try to start something, but I would definitely need Arnie and Mike and others to be, I could try to write something in the next couple of days and email it to folks for you to add in other sections. But I don't know how we approve something like this without having another meeting before the 16th.
Yeah, and even the writing itself should only happen between less than a quorum of you. Mm-hmm. So otherwise it's deliberation if we are all like on the same Google Doc looking at it and deliberating back and forth. So if 3 of you at most could coordinate, is probably best.
So if Mike, Arnie, and I coordinated something, that could work. And then we have do we have a meeting before the next?
That's a great question. I think yeah. I think we have one on the 9th.
The
Mhm.
9th, the 9th is a Wednesday.
Mhm.
Oh, that's right. That's our normal meeting day. Sorry.
It's been a while since we met normally.
So is that so Arnie, I know you're not in Moab, but do you have any capacity if I was to start to try to draft something up? And Mike, could we work on something that we could bring to the board for the next meeting that would be ready before the 16th then? Does that work?
I'd like you to, if you don't mind, Cara, I'd like you to set up an outline, a header, and then an outline of what points you kind of want in there and send it to me. I'll add my comments to it and some things in there. And then Mike, if you would turn around and add yours. And if the three of us actually wanted to get together prior to the 9th and go over the latest version, what we felt was good, what we felt was bad, that'd be okay by me to present to the board for the 9th. That'd be okay. I can do that.
You can do that. Mike, do you have capacity to do that?
Yeah.
I have somewhat limited capacity, but I can throw together the bare bones of it and then look to you guys to help me flesh it out, because I definitely don't feel qualified to go into some of the more detailed concerns you have, but I do feel like I can help with drafting a letter or a statement or whatever we're calling it that you know, can give some of our opinions and suggestions.
So let's see if we can scope out how much we're talking about. I would like to really keep this simple in front of council.
I was thinking a page and a half total.
Yeah, you're talking about PowerPoint slide presentation now? Or are you talking about a Word document or what?
I was talking about a Word document, but if you would rather do, I was not thinking about a PowerPoint presentation, but if that's what it needs to be, I can do that instead.
I wasn't thinking about a PowerPoint presentation either. I was thinking about calling it a brief review.
There you go.
I was going to call it a very brief review. It certainly isn't a white paper. That's for darn sure.
Right.
We wanted to put it on 1.5 pages. And I think if we go more than 1.5 pages, then we're talking in calm speak. So let's keep it simple.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that will work as long as it's kind of bulletized. I'm trying to make it digestible, guys.
I know. Well, we
That's
need,
all.
we need to work on it. I don't think we need to figure that exactly what it looks like today with this larger group. But I think that the three of us can come up with something, and it may well translate well onto a couple of PowerPoint slides. But I think first we have to have the content. And to me, I start with content on writing something. So that's kind of where I was headed.
Okay, so Carla, I like Arnie's idea. If you'd be kind enough to draft a very brief outline, 1.5 pages long, you know, to be, and then forward it on to each of us, and then we'll just keep iterating until we finally have something we like.
And the outline won't be 1.5 pages long. The outline will probably be less than 1/2 page. But then you guys can fill in the spaces. Okay,
that sounds great. Well, I'll look forward to getting that, and don't work too hard at it, all right? In other words,
I won't. Don't worry. Don't worry. I won't. I figure the best way to approach this is get some things down on paper and then start having a little bit of back and forth about it, and then it will evolve. So yeah, I will help facilitate that. And then I think we should shoot for having that, if possible, in a good draft form by the 4th of December. So that then there's plenty of time for it to go, because it won't be that long. So it should be something, if we have it done by the 4th of December, then we should be able to get it to the rest of the board to look at before the meeting on the 9th. Does that seem feasible to you guys?
Yeah, the 4th of December is the end of next week.
Yes, because our meeting is the week after that.
Yeah. Okay, well, all right, well, I'll be around that weekend, so that's probably what I'll do. As soon as I get it, will dump in my stuff, and Arnie can dump in his.
Yeah, what I'll do, and I'll probably either this afternoon do a very fast something with this, and then email it to both of you guys, or it'll happen tomorrow. And I will not be putting in a heap of time, because I'm going to be looking to come back to it. But I think I've got enough chicken scratchings here to come up with something.
Very good. Thank you.
All right. So. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just real quick, while you're on this agenda.
Huh?
Maybe can you hear me, or is Kyle wanting to talk?
No, you were. I think
I had unmuted my microphone. I think the main thing the council wants to know, are we mining our water? I don't think they're going to get into all of this other stuff.
And I think what I've been hearing the group say as we go around about this is, I don't know that the report tells us that definitively, one way or the other. It suggests it. It suggests it's highly likely, but it doesn't definitively say that. Go ahead.
Yeah, Cara, I just wanted to touch base on the December 16th meeting. At our normal agenda prep meetings, the mayor had asked me to put together kind of a all things water work session with the council. And Carly and I have talked about what that means, and it's not the intent for the board for us to come into that meeting and say, here's the number, or
Right.
choose USGS study, or choose the Gardner study, or choose the Ken Combs study. The intent was to say, kind of start establishing a framework of information so the water resources gets ratcheted up, because council's going to be going into my understanding, Carly, correct me, or Mike, going to be going into some strategic planning efforts right after the first of the year sometime. And so we wanted to kind of give them a briefing just so if council says, oh, this is important in our strategic plan, which I would anticipate that it is, Mike, but I don't know that this would give them enough to be able to say, oh, there's a lot of information out there, but none of it's ready to give us the number on the 16th. It wasn't my intent not to do that. It was to say, here's that. And my intent would be to invite Ken Combe, Mark Stilson, Bill Gardner's fine. Mike, if you think you want to invite him, not so much that everyone has a role to play in that, but that to be available for some Q&A, right? Things if they want. You and I, we all know we could spend 8 hours on this, but I think the most the mayor is going to give us is 2 hours. So that's my understanding of it. Now she could, like Carly said, she controls the agenda, but that's, I was going to kind of lead to pull together the various elements, and I may draw on some of your expertise as we go. So that's what I wanted to, if there's anything else, questions for me, I'd be happy to answer.
So Chuck, you were thinking about maybe inviting Phil and Ken to the meeting on the 16th?
Possibly to be there for Q&A, but if they don't have to. But if you think that that's too much, we don't have to. We can just have council and staff. That's fine too.
Well, you know, Stilson and Gardner and Colm are going to be the three heavy technical hitters, you know, first tier hitters, and Arnie, people like Arnie and I, and a lot of other people below them somewhere. And it kind of strikes me that sort of brain power conglomeration really kind of belongs with the groundwater management plan process.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I don't really want to have these two. I have to think about that one, Chuck. That's a great question.
Yeah. And the intent is to try and give the council as comprehensive but not overwhelming overview, if you will. That's kind of what my read on it from the mayor is. Get it enough to recognize that, okay, there's more stuff coming. And of course, council knows that we've been going through the adjudication and the ground. You've told them about the groundwater management plan coming forth, but I think this is kind of the next step in like spreading information out to not only council, but as we go through the work session environment.
Yeah. Well, Chuck, my only fear on having people like Gardner and Colm in front of council is they're going to be way over their heads. Okay, I mean, I'm sure they're going to get into technical gibberish and stuff that council won't be interested. I mean, that's a function that you and I can really help digest.
Yeah.
For
I
council.
wasn't going to have them play any roles in it. It was more of be available for Q&A. But you're right. All those guys are smart people who can talk a long time. So you're right. I agree with you, and I think that that's the framework that we'll take now, unless the mayor says differently. We won't have those people there. We'll keep it to staff, council, and other
Yeah.
party.
Yeah.
I think an important thing is trying to not use as many words as possible to explain something.
Okay.
Yeah, Chuck, you can really help me digest whatever it was we did. You know, that presentation I wrote, hopefully, at least the first half of it was intended to be pretty top level, and you can help me with that, you know. So,
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Thanks, Carla.
Sorry, I started writing the beginning of the outline while we were talking because a couple thoughts came to my mind. So it sounds like what we have now is I'll be working with Arnie and Mike on creating a document we will review at the next meeting. That will be for review and passing on to council at the next meeting. So we're going to go back to item 5, discussion of the Gardner report and whatnot. Is that correct? Is that where we want to go next?
if you want.
Go for it. Well, and I honestly think, and let me just ask a really quick question of Jeremy. I'm assuming that the water conservation plan update and working on that more, you have not yet had a chance to do that, I'm imagining, Jeremy?
No, not yet.
Okay, so I think we can basically, if we don't get to this meeting, that's fine, unless people disagree. It seems like what we're talking about is more important at this moment than that. Is that correct? Are we good?
Good.
Okay, we'll go back to item 5. So go for it, Mike. I think Mike and Arnie, but Mike in particular, this was mostly your.
Yeah, let me share my screen just one moment here. Let me find the right tab here. Where'd it go? Stand by, I gotta find. Oh, here we go. Okay, it's coming. It's coming. Share screen. Whiteboard. Uh-oh. Can you, that's not what I wanted. Stop it. Oh, sorry about that. Oh, here we go. I got it. Okay. So you guys see that?
Yes.
All right. So this is it's grown to about 30 slides now, but only the first half of it or so is really intended for top level discussion with the council. So that's the subject, moving to a water restricted future. Now would be a good time. Basically, I don't want to wait 2, 3, 4 years for the groundwater management plan to come out with recommendations or definitions of how much water we have to use. So I'm trying to point out that water demand is increasing all the time. We've got population growth, commercial growth, well and spring level are declining, not a lot of snow, periodic summer drought, precip cycles, climate change, so anyway, that's all reasons for concern. What the city does presently is that we assume, Chuck, correct me if I'm wrong, that when new apps for residential and commercial development come in, we think we got a lot of water rights, we're good to go. And I think that era is coming to an end, and I think we ought to start explicitly considering will-serve commitments. And I throw in the famous John Wesley Powell. You guys all know that about fighting words and all that kind of good stuff. And here's another quote I found for him. I love this quote. Years of drought and famine come, and years of flood and famine come, and the climate is not changed with dance, libation, or prayer. I love that. So anyway, here's a nifty addition to the to the DWR website. Great one, which takes a number of wells here in the valley. A lot of them are USGS monitoring wells. Here's the 1970s, kind of dry out here typically. And then early in the 1980s, rain levels and well levels came up by and large, and they've been slowly declining over the years, typically. And the farther north you go, the more they tend to look a little more benign. And the ones on the far south end are declining more rapidly. So that's, in the end, when neighbor A complains about neighbor B pulling his well down, that's kind of the end definition of where conflicts are coming up. So the end game for this discussion is what I want. I want to suggest that the city change their policy sometime during next year by metering new requests for residential or commercial water. And we'll phrase those requests in terms of equivalent residential connections. One ERC is about 400 gallons a day, or about a little less than a half acre foot per year. And obviously we're going to participate in the groundwater management process. I don't want to wait for the groundwater management process to complete because it's a few years away. Development's going on all the time, and I claim that wise water policy means not making commitments we can't fulfill. So the city can adopt any water policy we wish as long as we don't violate state law. So I think we can kind of get this sort of legislation, record keeping on the books without running afoul of anything that might be established at the groundwater management plan. So what do I mean by metering? Well, we're all going to talk about it, but the core of it is explicitly accepting or denying requests for new water and planning. When it comes to planning, keeping better records, new annual quotas, perhaps a maximum ERC limit for any single application. Certainly we'll offer bonuses for conservation or secondary water use. We can amend the rules whenever we need to. Applicants who contribute their own existing Glen Canyon aquifer withdrawals are obviously not subject to that because there's no net further withdrawals from that aquifer. And people who contribute their own water that comes out of another aquifer are not subject to this sort of restraints either. So something on that order. Why are we having this discussion now? Because a lot of people are going to say, well, hey, the USGS just a couple of years ago said we have 13 to 15,000 acre feet per year to use, or the city and county together are only using less than 4. But those numbers are kind of apples and oranges sort of things because the study counted groundwater in the whole watershed, both good culinary water from the Glen Canyon aquifer and somewhat salty water that's often used for irrigation, water from the Valley Fill aquifer. That latter water can be treated. But anyway, it looks at first sight like we got plenty of water to grow on. And some people may point to that. So here's a nifty little picture of what the watershed looks like. It starts at the top of the La Salles up here, particularly on the north end. The Moab Irrigation Company, I'm sitting on that board, has a couple of mountain ditches to supply South Mesa and Wilson Mesa up here. That's what these guys are. Pretty fair chunk of water. I walked these suckers a few years ago. If you ever want an interesting walk up in the mountains, go walk these ditches that came back, that went in decades ago. And the Glen Canyon aquifer tends to run down this way, and the Valley Fill aquifer tends to recharge from the south end. Here's another picture of it, the Glen Canyon aquifer. Yeah, Mark Stilson had this picture in his report. But basically from the north end, it tends to come down this way underneath sand flats. And the southern end of the mountains tend to recharge the top end of Pat Creek, which recharges the Valley Fill aquifer. How much is an acre foot? A lot of people don't know. An acre foot is just a measure of volume, 1 foot high by one acre in area, which it turns out to be, for example, 272 by 162 feet. So it's about the size of a football field, 1 foot in depth, just so you have some idea. So you go back, don't we have culinary water to grow on for some time? What is a problem, Mike? And I say, not really. It's less than you think. There's a new hooker. City and county's existing culinary water rights come from this Glen Canyon group aquifer. The latest USGS or Journal of Hydrology study says that this aquifer, particularly the deep parts of it, all right, are already being withdrawn at its long-term recharge rate, which turns out to be right around 3,600 acre feet per year. And as Arnie says, we keep saying over and over again, it doesn't matter what the city thinks, it doesn't matter what our consultants think. DWR are the people who are going to be the authority who determines what the legal safe yield value is. That number has not been yet determined. This is just one author's estimate of what it is. But if and when it's established, it will imply that no new net withdrawal from the Glen Canyon Aquifer would be permitted. In other words, you just can't say, hey, we got a well that's pumping 1,500 acre feet this year, we'll just bump it up to 1,750 next year. You wouldn't be able to do that if a safe yield is established unless you can compensate for it somewhere else. And here's the code that comes right out of the state code, establishing what we mean by safe yield. The amount of water can be withdrawn without exceeding the long-term recharge of the basin or unreasonably affecting the basin's physical and chemical integrity. So it's a little broader. Before you can limit withdrawals, a state engineer shall determine the groundwater basin's safe yield. That's a $64,000 question, folks. If the Glen Canyon Aquifer were closed to new withdrawals, and I say it is a finite water source, what other sources could everybody here in the valley tap? And first data point I want to make is that nothing is easy. A lot of competition for it, lots of consequences. The biggest discharge that came out of the USGS 2018 and 19 study, I mean, their best estimate was measuring discharges and using that as a placeholder for recharge. But anyway, the biggest piece of that was Mill Creek, all right, which is kind of surface water and it's kind of groundwater, right? It actually starts off as groundwater way up high in the mountains, and then it moves to the surface, it comes down, and in turn, those surface rights are owned by Moab Irrigation Company. It's a nonprofit whose water rights go back to 1890. And typically what Mark Stilson has often reminded me, municipalities do is they trade agricultural uses for municipal ones. So that's one obvious place new water could come from, but you're going to have to deal with the irrigation company and so forth. The only other aquifer in town is the Valley Fill Aquifer with poor quality but treatable water. Mark has suggested that we could tap the underflow to the Colorado River. That sounds a little dicey to me because that sounds like a recipe for drying up the wetlands. That one would be tricky. And I will point out that the county owns 3 CFS, I believe it is, modest unused rights to the Colorado River that they have never used. It would be expensive to pump and store and so forth. And I asked Mark about this the other day. He claims at the moment the state still thinks they got 400,000 acre feet per year of water they can give away to the lower basin states without impacting anybody else. And then immediately afterwards, I got a text from John Weishaupt, who tells me that the state is that 400,000 number could change downward, he thinks. So I'm just going to throw this out here. You know, how much water is in the river is a big thing. So anyway, more study is needed. Well number 12, more monitoring elsewhere in the valley is critical, and city contributions to funding, I think, probably will be necessary. So to say it again, and this is the message I'm trying to get across to council right now, we have a painful but manageable paradigm shift in front of us now. The water's always been there until now. It's essentially free, all right, but no more, because now, and oftentimes you're going to have to buy it in one form or another from somebody else. So we'll have to buy, trade, share, or bank water for new water. And this may limit residential and commercial growth. And certainly we'll have to conserve. All these items are ways of doing it. So here's a nifty picture of looks to me like Lake Powell. Okay, so that's the first 15 or so slides. That's the main message I want to get across to council. This is a big deal. Nothing's going to happen overnight, but I would like to start discussion of getting metering regulations, metering infrastructure, if you will, into the books, even if we set quotas to big numbers so that they don't have any practical effect. I remember back in Boulder, Colorado, back in my college days, the city of Boulder put a growth limit on town, but they parked the numbers big enough so it didn't really stop anything. So we could do the same sort of thing here, so that if we want to tighten quotas later on, all we got to do is change a few numbers instead of negotiate new laws. So you guys want me to stop here? The rest of it gets into details. I'll just quickly go through these. What do we mean by mining an aquifer? That's what.
Mike, could you hold on for just a second here? I'd like to talk about what you would just, there's kind of two different sections to this report, to this presentation. And the first section I thought was pretty important.
Okay.
And I'd kind of like to talk about that for a little bit. Once again, what you're going to tell the council at this point in time is that we don't need to stop development right now because of water. As a matter of fact, we don't want to do that. But what we do need to do is put in the legislative infrastructure now so that when that time comes, we won't be quarreling over one development or one development coming in. We'll already have the legislation, the ordinances in place. And have, as opposed to saying, whoa, one major development wants to come in and all of a sudden say, no, we can't do this. It sounds more like we're against that one developer as opposed to, well, we've got to think about the whole city. And I like the way this is done prior to getting our backs in a corner, so to speak. And that's what you were getting at, right? We're going to put the legislation in, the ordinances in, so that we have the means, so that the city has the means to tighten water use if it needs to in the future. That
is correct.
Okay, does anybody else want to comment about this? There were several good points that were made in this. Some of them I would have probably made bigger points in, but keeping it as short as possible is tough. But all of the points you've made in here are pretty good, Mike.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and by the way, guys, I welcome feedback from anybody. All right, I mean, you guys all have stuff.
We are so focused on the city that we're not talking about Spanish Valley and San Juan County.
We're about to.
Okay.
In the next few slides.
And Kyle, I like your point, is that at some point in time, Mike, I would also like it to be known to the city that they do have senior rights compared to other agencies and other water providers. And that depending upon how the groundwater management plan comes out, and you said we could trade them or get somebody else not to use theirs. And you did have that point in there. You didn't make it clear as in terms of big and bold that we could tell somebody else they can't use the water. But I don't think I don't think that politically is going to sit with anybody. But Kyle's point's well taken, is that there's more people than just the city here. And you're going to get to it. But anyways, any other comments, you guys, on what Mike's trying to say here to the council and what he's trying to get started? Cara, you get it?
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead, Mike.
Okay. Mining an aquifer. So there's 3 slides in here that I ginned up just to describe a so-called, always think of a water cooler in the back of a pickup truck, where you're pumping water out one hole in the bottom of the bucket, and then it kind of drains out all by itself through another hole. These are the springs. These are pumped wells over here. And so much water goes into the bucket every year, and so much water comes out. The idea is you don't want to drain all the water out of the bucket. Actually gets into the differential equations that govern the math, which generated these nifty little charts. Here's an example of where you're not mining the aquifer because the withdrawals are less than the recharge, which is the same thing as safe yield. So if you, at time 0, way back when you had an aquifer that was, say, 100 feet deep, full of sand, wet sand, if you will, and suddenly you open up the spring, so to speak, eventually the spring flow would take it down to some other equilibrium level over a long period of time. But it would, as long as that withdrawal rate doesn't exceed the recharge rate, it'll come down to some equilibrium above 0. Here in this case, it's 2/3 of its pre-development level. And these are just nice round numbers to use as an example in the model. On the other hand, if you have a recharge of 3,000 acre feet per year, and we suddenly start withdrawing 4, from 100 feet in depth over a long period of time, the aquifer will be completely drained. The spring flow will eventually decline to 0. This is mining the aquifer, and this is what we do not want to do. History of the city's water supply. Kyle, this is where your input is invaluable here. Since 1890, Schuylkill Springs. 1950s purchase of the George White wells. I learned, Kyle, if I got this right, you would know Ken Heffenbein. You know, Darcy's husband told me that they live out that way. And there were two George Whites, one of Redcliffe's fame and one of golf course. No, not golf course fame. There's two George Whites. Is that right? You still there? Never mind, I'll move on. Anyway, so that gave us the 4 springs that are presently in use, 2 wells, number 6 and 10. And well number 7 is not used for culinary use, it's used for golf course education, irrigation. But my understanding is it's culinary quality water. If I got that right. So it could be used.
There were 2 George Whites, yes.
Oh, okay. There you are. Thank you.
Yes, it was a Scorp Somerville ranch at first, and then the city bought the water rights, and I believe sold the land to George White, the second George White, out of Monticello.
Oh, really? Really? Confusing. No wonder I was confused, yeah. Anyway, so the city springs and wells in 2019, according to... Is this me that's making this noise? Sometimes when I have a little cord. Stand by 1 second. Okay, I hope that's better. When the cord on this headset drags against the microphone stand, it makes all kinds of weird noises. Anyway, so the city springs and wells, about 2,300 acre feet in 2019. That's what they reported to DWR. The county's wells also tapped the same aquifer. They got George White wells, number 4 and 5. They got a Chapman well, which is a big heavy hitter for them. Spanish Valley well is not so wonderful, but their withdrawals are a little over 1,000 acre feet in 2019. And as somebody else, as Kyle, you were just asking about, maybe I ought to move this slide up front, say more about it up front, because it's a big thing. But they've, back in 2011, they applied for 5,000 acre feet. They got it conditionally, but they have 1 well that's been approved and tested for 500 acre feet and will be in service soon to serve Sitless South Moab development. They've talked about a lot of people living there, junior water rights, and whether or not they'll get permission to use 20 other well locations in here remains to be seen. And if they can't do that, then they'd have to take it out of the Colorado River. They have permission to do that, but that's really an expensive proposition to build a ditch up Cane Creek and pump it up there. So our total present Glen Canyon group aquifer level is summing these 3 levels comes out to be about 3,800 acre feet. That's the numbers that I got. I don't know how Phil tabulated those numbers. He says it's about 3,600, pretty close, all right? You know, because things vary from year to year. And this does not count the lower Spanish Valley springs like Matrimony Springs, doesn't count private wells because we don't have a lot of data on them. You can use water rights at private wells and add those up, and some people have done that, but I haven't done it here. Okay, so now we get to the latest I call this a USGS report. Mark Stilson objected to my calling it that, saying that it's really published in the Journal of Hydrology, but all these authors are with, 4 out of 5 of them anyway, are all still work for the USGS. And this study draws heavily on that study. So for convenience here, I'm going to call it a USGS report. However, it has been independently published. I kind of jumped on Mark a little bit. I got a feeling he wants to keep control of the process here. But, anyway.
That's an understatement.
Thank you. Thank you, Arnie. So what did Phil say? He says, using a lump parameter model and carbon-14 groundwater ages, which I'm going to explain how that works down at the end of this presentation. We estimate that the recharge to the deeper Glen Canyon aquifer is about 3,400 acre feet per year, plus or minus about 2,000. Okay, now here he is using much the same way Ken Combe was confronted with. He's got a bunch of additive terms. In this case, they're multiplicative terms, but it's a similar sort of deal. Each term introduces an error band that RMS's, oh, I'm using the typical term, it adds in a random sort of way, if you will, rather than linear, to the error bands on the final estimate that he's going to get. So anyway, that's where that 1900 comes from. And interestingly enough, that estimated recharge is about equal to the measured discharge of the wells and springs, about 3,600 acre feet. So either Phil was real lucky or he knew what he was doing. Okay, so our objective here in the groundwater management plan is to make sure that that's a good number that we believe. Why do I have more confidence in this report than I do have in others? It's because Phil used a lot of geochemistry and environmental tracers to find out where water comes from and where it didn't go. And he did get an agreement between an independently calculated recharge and observed discharges. So we're going to get to the lump parameter model in a moment. That's Mark's main quibble because he makes them. So here's the way the lump parameter, well, the groundwater, Phil thinks that the vast majority of precipitation comes from this rectangle high up, starting at the divide there in the La Salles, and extends northeastward. And I'm trying to remember now the rationale why he parked it out exactly the way it does. It has to do with the precipitation falls off quickly as soon as you get off the high part of the mountains. And then this water all ends up down here on the northeast side of Spanish Valley. And Phil thinks that the Glen Canyon Aquifer, you guys remember, is Navajo on top, Cayenta in the middle, and Wingate on the bottom. The Navajo and Wingate are considered to be permeable, good conductivity and so forth. The Cayenta is a little more confining, and in some places, Phil remarked that when they kind of wished that they had paid more attention to this when they did the first study. But he thinks the Cayenta middle layer often, and we'll have to ask him exactly what he means here, confines water to either the shallow layers in the Navajo on top or the Wingate down below it. And the wells and springs, Phil thinks, are sourced in the deep aquifer, and here's a picture of it right down here below, down this way, down here underneath that line down here. And Mill Creek is sourced in the shallow part of the aquifer, whereas Ken and the previous USGS study didn't make any distinction between a shallow and a deep. So Phil used carbon-14 data together with isotopes, precipitation falling. He used isotopes up here to identify where the water fell, and he uses chemical signatures in the water to identify where it goes. And he uses radiocarbon-14 dating to establish how much older this water is than this water. And if you do all that, the basic lump parameter model looks like just a box, if you will, a rectangle, an aquifer, if you will, where water enters one side of it at time zero, if you will, and it's got dimensions X by Y by Z meters thick. And the water comes out of it sometime later, T years later. And you can see that if there's relatively little water coming in, it's going to move slower and it'll be older by the time it gets out. Whereas if you got a lot of water coming in, it'll have to move quickly through the aquifer and it'll be younger water coming out. So if you get an independent estimate on carbon-14 data, you got an estimate of how much water is flowing through there and how much water is going in.
Can I interrupt for just a second, Mike?
Betcha.
Carly's going to leave in a second. Chuck, are you going to be able to stick around for another 5 minutes, maybe 5 minutes over for this meeting, please? Chuck's not there. Keep going, Mike.
Yes, I am. I'll be here.
Okay.
Okay, so then what Phil did was he extended that basic lump parameter model to what he called an exponential piston model. I think this is supposed to be the piston. I'm not sure why it's exponential. I'm not really real sure. I got to ask you about that. But here's the area that's being precipitated on way high in the mountains, and then it flows in this deep Lynn Canyon aquifer all the way down to the north edge of the valley. And these dimensions now, X, Y, and Z, are Phil's estimate. All right, and they're subject to the same kinds of wild ass guess or scientific wild ass guesses that Ken would have had to have made for water flowing into his study area. So these numbers are going to be the numbers that we're going to talk about a lot, together with the depth of the thing and 300 meters. So these three numbers, the permeability, this is what fraction of the aquifer is actually contains water and how much of it is rock. And then the carbon-14 dating has an error band associated with it. There's all kinds of things that can mess up carbon-14 dating. So here's the uncertainty, the 1 sigma uncertainty is put on random errors, and the RSS is all these things, which means root sum square. So anyway, so he's got a nifty equation in there, which I didn't bother to reproduce in here. Oh, there's the equation right there. This is just summing up all the errors from the component parts of the equation that describes all this. And you end up with a 1 sigma standard deviation, which we can call uncertainty, of about 2,000 acre feet per year. In other words, we think that the estimated recharge rate by this technique is 3,400 plus or minus 1865. And if you make that assumption, then our safe yield estimate is centered around that 3,400, but it could be as low as around 1,500 acre feet, and it could be as large as about 5,000. So if the actual recharge is right at the nominal level this study proclaims, that's 3,400. If that number ends up being verified by DWR, then we basically have to stop new discharges right now. Best case, by this study, right, which we will argue about to the ends of the earth, is that we have 50% to grow on. In other words, taking that adding 1 sigma onto the 3,400 gives us that number. So obviously, again, more study is needed, new well, blah, blah, blah. That's it. Any questions?
Mike, was this sent to all the water board members?
I think I sent it to a bunch of them. I'm not sure if I got them all or not. Kyle, are you?
I'd like to comment on this in more detail at a later time.
Okay.
As I've looked over, I read through it briefly, but I haven't given any thought to what I would consider would be constructive comments to this that I could nail down at this point in time. And I'd like to take some time to ingest it if I could, and perhaps get you something before the next and or at the next water board meeting.
That'd be wonderful. That'd be wonderful. Yeah.
Mike, I don't think I got it. So if you could resend it to me.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to say, if we could make sure we all have seen it before the next meeting, that'd be great.
Okay, let me see if I can hit all you guys again, Jeremy as well.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Chuck, did you get it? Let me see. Well, I'll just send all of you guys the latest version. It's been through a couple of revs since I passed it out the first time.
Yeah, I'd like to have it too.
Okay, Chuck, no problem. Well, thank you guys for watching all that. This is a complicated deal, and we're all in this together, you know. So,
Or what's on the agenda now at this point in time? What I wanted to talk about was the last thing that's still on the screen there, where it's city's contributions to funding will be necessary. And I have another question too for the board. Gar, where are we at with our agenda?
you want me to unshare my screen?
So well, unless Arnie needs to see this, I think it'll be great if you unshared the screen. As far as the agenda, the last item that was supposed to be on it was talking about the water conservation plan update. We already talked about not doing that at this meeting. So after we finish this discussion, wherever it leads us, it is the end of the meeting.
Okay, so then let's talk about a certain aspect of this presentation that Mike has given, and that is that we do have an opportunity with this new well to get some drawdown characteristics and do some geophysics with it. And I don't see anybody else, if Division of Water Rights doesn't want to help pay for it, I don't know how it's going to happen without the city's putting in some money. I don't see getting a grant between now and then. I don't know where other funding could come from. I'm hoping the city will do the best they can at this point in time. And I do believe we can push water rights for more funding. The other thing was that there's discussions going on right now between the city and other people and water rights, because Mark does want to have a hand in this. And Mark does really care at this point in time. Mark is doing his best, working within the realms of his institution to work to get a number so that we can move forward. But one of the things that has been discussed is coming up with a monitoring plan for the valley, an adequate monitoring plan, not just for the city, but for the entire valley and determining the safe yield. And I'd like to see that happen sooner than later myself. And I'd like to remind everybody that, you know, it may cost $36,000 the first year, and then maybe the second year there might be a whole lot of capital equipment put in. The actual monitoring for this, when it's all said and done, won't be that expensive. You know, we're talking maybe not even $10,000, less than that, to actually do the monitoring when the capital equipment's put in. But our funding cycles are all coming around right now. And I'm hoping that, maybe we could put this on as an agenda item too, where the city will list the capital improvements that are going to be needed, the capital costs associated with this monitoring program, high on their list for the Community Impact Board. I think you can get a fair amount of money out of the Community Impact Board for the capital equipment costs associated with what's going to be required for this monitoring. I also think there's other sources to tap. I realize that this is not going to be, it's way beyond any sort of grant you're going to get from water quality. And first, second of all, it doesn't really improve water quality. We'll probably be able to get some money out of water quality, but not a lot. But I'd like the city to start thinking about where we can get this going. And like I say, our funding cycle is coming around, and I don't want to wait another year and a half to have money in hand to start putting some of this monitoring plan together. And so I'm hoping that the city will think long and hard about making this a priority, so that we aren't 5 years down the road determining, oh my gosh, they've given out a whole bunch more water rights and we're going to have to tell people to turn their water off. So Chuck, I don't know where you stand on that, or how much you've been involved, and what the city is thinking about in terms of having money for those capital expenditures associated with a comprehensive groundwater management plan. Groundwater comprehensive monitoring plan, not management plan, monitoring plan. Okay.
Yeah, well, you know, I've attended a couple of the meetings that Mark Stilson's had, or I think both of them that he had. I still haven't seen the plan, Arnie. Is there someone's got an adopted groundwater monitoring plan ready to go?
So the USGS and the UGS have both been throwing out ideas on what they'd like to see, but I thought that at some point in time, you realize they're closer to coming up with an actual monitoring plan out there and putting numbers to that monitoring plan. They are. Okay, I know they are.
Yeah. Okay. When we had our conversation last week with them, you know, we talked about our well number 4, which is a well that we don't use. It's not officially abandoned, but it's been closed down. And that's one we're replacing with well number 12. And USGS has been apparently using that well for monitoring, is what they reported. So we had the discussions about, well, we won't abandon that well so that they can continue to monitor well number 4. And is that sufficient for now, for that, just as one example, at one location? Maybe. And then we talked about what are the costs of a new monitoring well. And that's what I'm not clear from them. I think we need to have further. I'm used to landfill monitoring wells, which aren't 12-inch diameter casings, right? They're much smaller, 4-inch casing or something like that. So I'm not sure what those costs are, but I mean, I think that our intent is to cooperate from a budget standpoint. I mean, Mike, you're the guy who makes the decisions, you and the rest of council, but it's on our radar screen, Arnie. It says staff level to support monitoring as we can, knowing all of the other needs that we have. You know, Levi could tell you the distribution system problems we have that he fights constantly, and we're still trying to get another storage tank. But if we can cooperatively work on some monitoring things, that's why I was so excited to have Ken put in that monitoring plan into that phase 3 report. Not that it was the be all and end all, but it was something that we all should be working on and moving forward to. And maybe we eat the elephant one bite at a time. And maybe that's what you're getting at by saying, you know, that's why we're talking about well number 12 or well number 4 maybe is something that we can work on and afford to do now.
Okay, I guess you heard my point is that there's gonna, if we want to do this in the next couple of years, we're somehow, the city's not going to be able to pay for it. It's going to be a cooperative effort, and we're going to have to get funding from outside sources. That's all there is to it. And I guess it's just what the idea here trying to get across is that I'm hoping the city's going to want to support that on a high level, getting that funding together for that is where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we support, my office supports groundwater monitoring. It's just a question of what the city can afford, but we'll work cooperatively with. We have a SCADA system right now on our watering system. I don't know how that helps potentially.
Okay, I guess I'm going to be done with that topic. I mean, it's time for us to go. I have one other question for the board, and Carly left. Are we a member short at this point in time? And did we send a recommendation on a new person yet? Or how's that going?
So Denver, and you're referring to Denver?
Yes.
So we talked, I don't remember if you were at the last meeting when we talked about Denver leaving, but we did agree that for the moment, while we are in this odd situation of doing things by Zoom and whatnot, we weren't going to try to find another member this year. Well, this year's almost over. So perhaps that's something we could talk about at the next meeting, but no one's been looking for it because per this board's suggestion, we weren't actively going to do that just yet.
So everybody, but I guess you want to put that on the agenda for the next meeting?
That's what I just said. Okay. We can do that.
Yeah, let's do that. Okay. Anything else, you guys?
You're not chairing, Arnie, but anything else, you guys? Anybody else have anything they want to add before we call it a meeting?
I'm good. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, have a good night.
Yep. Bye.